"What nurse?" I asked, and the room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind us. My son's smile didn't disappear right away, but it faltered, like something fragile cracking under pressure. We were sitting at his dining table, the one with the polished oak surface I'd helped him pick out years ago, back when he still asked for my opinion on things. His wife stood by the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't taken a sip from. I had just come from my third chemotherapy session that week, my body still weak, my legs unsteady, my coat hanging loosely over shoulders that had grown thinner in ways I tried not to think about. "The home care nurse," Daniel repeated, slower this time. Like, maybe I hadn't heard him correctly. "The one we've been paying for. She said you've been doing better." I blinked at him, trying to process the words, but they didn't fit into anything real. There had been no nurse. No one checking on me. No one helping me when I struggled to get out of bed in the mornings or when I sat in my car for 10 minutes in the hospital parking lot, gathering the strength just to walk inside. I had driven myself to every appointment, gripping the steering wheel as the road blurred slightly in front of me, telling myself I could handle it, that I didn't want to be a burden. "Daniel," I said quietly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, "I've been alone this whole time." His eyes shifted, just for a second, toward his wife. It was a small movement, but it said everything. She set the glass down a little too carefully, like she was afraid it might shatter if she moved too fast. "Maybe there's been some confusion," she said, her tone smooth, practiced. "The agency must have mixed something up." I watched her as she spoke, really watched her, and for the first time, I noticed the way she didn't quite meet my eyes. The way her fingers tightened slightly against the counter. And suddenly, things that hadn't made sense before began to line up in my mind. The missed calls. The paperwork I never received. The way Daniel always said, "Don't worry, Mom, it's all taken care of." I had believed him. Of course I had. He was my son. But sitting there, with the weight of her silence pressing in from one side and his uncertainty from the other, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady realization that something had been taken from me, and no one had expected me to notice. I did not argue with her. I did not ask more questions that night. I simply nodded, the way I had learned to do over the years whenever something felt off, but I could not yet prove it. The conversation drifted to safer topics after that, as if nothing had happened, as if I had not just discovered that the care my son believed I was receiving did not exist. Daniel talked about work, about a new client in Chicago, about numbers and contracts that meant nothing to me anymore. I sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, listening to his voice fill the room while a different kind of silence settled inside me. It was the kind of silence that comes when something important breaks, but makes no sound. When dinner ended, I insisted on clearing my own plate. My body ached in that familiar, dull way, the kind that had become part of my daily life, but I moved carefully, steadily, as if nothing was wrong. Sophia offered a polite smile, the kind that looked right but felt empty, and I noticed how quickly she turned away when our eyes almost met. On the drive home, the road stretched out in front of me under the soft glow of streetlights, each mile feeling longer than the last. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as I replayed every small detail from the past few months. The envelopes that never arrived. The phone calls that ended too quickly. The way Daniel always reassured me before I even had the chance to ask questions. I had told myself it was love. I had told myself he was busy, that life had simply pulled him in different directions. But now, those memories felt different, like puzzle pieces that had been turned the wrong way on purpose. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly as I had left it. Quiet. Still. No lights on except the one by the front door that I always kept burning, in case I came home late. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the sound echoing softly through the empty space. For a moment, I just stood there listening. No footsteps. No voices. No one asking how I felt or if I needed help. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the same clock I had been hearing for years. I set my keys down on the small table by the door and walked slowly into the living room, lowering myself onto the couch with a careful breath. This was what it had really been like. Not confusion. Not a mistake. Just absence. I reached for the stack of unopened mail on the coffee table, my fingers brushing over the envelopes as a quiet thought settled in my mind, clear and steady. If there had been money, if there had been help, if someone had been arranging things in my name, then there would be traces. And if there were traces, I would find them. I was tired, more tired than I had ever been in my life, but beneath that exhaustion, something else had begun to take shape. Not anger. Not yet. Just a calm, deliberate need to understand exactly what had been taken from me, and who had been standing there while it happened. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not because I had rested, but because something inside me would not let me stay asleep. The house was still dim, the early light barely touching the edges of the curtains, and for a moment I lay there listening to my own breathing, steady but heavy, as if my body was reminding me of everything it had been carrying alone. I pushed myself up slowly, pausing at the edge of the bed until the slight dizziness passed, then made my way to the kitchen. The coffee maker clicked on with a familiar sound, filling the silence in a way that almost felt comforting, and I stood there waiting, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, as if I had all the time in the world. But I did not. I brought my mug to the small table by the window and sat down, pulling the stack of mail closer to me. There was nothing unusual at first glance. Bills. Advertisements. A few envelopes from the hospital. I opened them. One by one, careful, methodical, my fingers moving slower than they used to, but just as steady. Each statement told the same quiet story. Charges.
Payments due.
No external coverage. No record of assistance. No indication that anyone, anywhere, had been paying for anything on my behalf. I set the papers down in a neat pile and stared at them, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the truth to settle in completely. Then I reached for my phone. The number for the hospital billing department was saved under favorites, a small detail that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. When the woman on the other end answered, her voice was polite, professional, the kind of voice that had probably delivered difficult information to many people before me. I gave her my name, my date of birth, and asked the question as simply as I could. Has anyone been making payments on my account? There was a pause, the sound of typing in the background, and then her answer came back just as calm as before.
No, ma'am.
All payments have been processed directly under your name. There are no third-party contributors listed. I thanked her, even though there was nothing to thank her for, and ended the call. For a long moment, I just sat there, the phone still in my hand, feeling the weight of something undeniable settle into place. This was not confusion. This was not a mistake. Somewhere between what my son believed and what I had been living, there was a gap wide enough to swallow months of my life. I stood up slowly, carrying my coffee back to the counter, and looked around the kitchen I had spent years in, the cabinets I had organized, the small details I had once thought mattered. Everything looked the same, but it did not feel the same anymore. I walked to the drawer by the sink and pulled out my bank statements, flipping through them carefully, my eyes scanning each line, each number, each date. And then I saw it. Small at first. Easy to miss if you were not looking for it. Transfers. Regular. Consistent. Money leaving accounts that were supposed to support my care, redirected somewhere else entirely. My fingers tightened slightly on the paper, not in anger, but in recognition. Because now, for the first time, I was not just feeling that something was wrong. I was beginning to see exactly how it had been done. Once I saw the transfers, I did not rush to conclusions. I sat down again, placing the papers neatly in front of me as if they were pieces of a puzzle I had to respect before I could solve. The amounts were not random. They were consistent, almost careful, spaced out in a way that would not draw attention unless someone was looking closely. I followed the dates with my finger, tracing them back week by week, and a quiet pattern began to form. The same days I had gone to treatment. The same weeks I had struggled the most. Money that should have made things easier had disappeared at the exact moments I needed it most. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a second, not out of exhaustion, but to steady my thoughts. There was only one person who had access. Only one person who had insisted on helping with paperwork, who had offered to handle things when I said I was too tired to deal with forms and phone calls. Sophia. I could see her now in my mind, sitting at my kitchen table months ago, her voice calm and reassuring, telling me not to worry about the details. I will take care of everything for you, she had said, sliding the documents closer to herself before I even had a chance to read them fully. At the time, it had felt like kindness. Now it felt like something else entirely. I opened my eyes and looked down at the statements again, this time not as a confused patient, but as someone beginning to understand the full shape of what had been done. This was not carelessness. It was deliberate, precise, quiet enough to stay hidden, but structured enough to work over time. I stood up slowly and walked to the hallway where I kept a small file cabinet, the one I had not touched in months because I believed everything was already being managed. I pulled open the drawer and began sorting through the folders, each labeled in my own handwriting. Medical, insurance, personal. The order I had once relied on was still there, but something inside it had shifted. Documents were missing. Others had been rearranged. And then I found a form I did not remember signing. A copy tucked behind older paperwork as if it had been placed there quickly, without much thought for whether I would ever look again. I held it carefully, reading each line, each authorization, each small piece of language that gave someone else permission to act on my behalf. My name was at the bottom, written in my own hand, but I could not remember the moment I had signed it. I could only remember being tired, trusting, letting someone else take over because I believed they had my best interest at heart. I lowered the paper slowly, a calm settling over me that felt different from anything I had felt before. This was no longer confusion, no longer suspicion. This was clarity. And with that clarity came something even more dangerous than anger, patience. Because now that I understood what had been done, I also understood that the truth did not need to be shouted. It only needed to be revealed at the right moment. I did not call Daniel. I did not confront Sophia. Instead, I placed the paper back into the folder exactly where I had found it, smoothing it down as if nothing had been disturbed. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one that felt deliberate rather than empty. I moved through the room slowly, taking in the small details I had ignored for months. The calendar on the wall with appointments I had written myself. The pill organizer on the kitchen counter, each compartment filled by my own hands. The absence of anything that suggested help had ever been here. It was almost precise in its emptiness, like someone had made sure there would be no evidence left behind. Later that afternoon, I drove to the hospital for my scheduled session, the same 40-minute drive I had made countless times before. The road felt familiar, but my thoughts were sharper now, more focused. I was no longer trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I was observing. When I arrived, I checked in as usual, offering a small smile to the receptionist who had begun to recognize me over the past few weeks. As I sat in the waiting area, a nurse approached me with a clipboard, her expression warm but slightly puzzled. "Mrs. Collins," she said, "we had you listed for a home care follow-up last week. Did that visit go well?" I looked up at her, holding her gaze just long enough to let the question settle between us. "There was no visit," I said calmly. She hesitated, flipping through the pages in her hands. "That is strange," she murmured. "It shows here that services were confirmed and completed." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I understood. "May I have a copy of that record?" I asked. She studied me for a moment, then handed me the clipboard. I read the entry carefully, noting the dates, the signatures, the confirmation that someone had reported I was receiving regular assistance. It was all there, written in clean, official language that made it look real. But I knew better. I handed the clipboard back with a quiet thank you and followed her down the hallway when my name was called. During the treatment, I sat still, the room filled with the soft hum of machines and the low voices of other patients, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every detail I had uncovered was beginning to connect, forming a picture that was no longer uncertain. This had been arranged, documented, approved. Someone had not only taken what was meant for me, but had also built a story around it convincing enough that even the hospital believed it. When I left that day, The air outside felt cooler against my skin, the late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the parking lot. I paused by my car, one hand resting lightly on the door, and allowed myself a single, steady breath. I was not confused anymore. I was not guessing. I knew. And more importantly, I knew that the truth was not something I needed to chase. It was already there, waiting for the right moment to be seen. I did not go home right away that evening. Instead, I sat in my car with the engine off, the silence pressing gently around me as I looked down at the copy of the hospital record resting in my lap. The paper felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it weighed, but because of what it proved. Dates. Signatures. Confirmations that I had never given. Someone had spoken for me, acted for me, and made it all look official. I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside my bag, then started the car with slow, steady hands. Over the next few days, I did something I had not done in a long time. I paid attention to everything. I called my insurance provider, not with accusations, but with quiet questions. I asked them to walk me through every claim filed under my name, every service approved, every payment processed. The woman on the phone was thorough, patient, and unaware that each answer she gave was building something inside me. There had been claims, multiple, home care services, follow-up visits, assistance programs that I had supposedly enrolled in months ago. All of them approved. All of them paid out. None of them received. When I asked where the payments had been sent, there was a pause. Then she explained that the designated contact on file had authorized a different routing account for disbursement. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat there for a long moment, letting the words settle into something solid. A different account, authorized by someone who had been given access. That detail did not surprise me anymore. What surprised me was how carefully it had all been arranged. Not rushed, not sloppy. Each step placed exactly where it needed to be to avoid questions. That night, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, the same place where Sophia had once sat across from me, smiling as she offered to help. I logged into my accounts, one by one, checking settings I had not reviewed in months. Contact permissions. Authorized representatives. Emergency access. Her name appeared more than once. Clean. Official. Accepted without hesitation because I had trusted her to act in my best interest. I did not remove her name. Not yet. Instead, I took notes. Dates. Screenshots. Copies of everything I could access without alerting anyone. My movements were slow, deliberate, almost routine. If anyone had been watching, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just an older woman going through her paperwork, trying to stay organized. But beneath that quiet surface, everything had changed. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. The next time I saw Daniel, I knew exactly what I would do. Not confront him with anger. Not overwhelm him with accusations. He did not need noise. He needed clarity. Because somewhere in all of this, he still believed he had been taking care of me. And when that belief finally met the truth, it would not require raised voices to break. It would only require the right words, placed at the right moment, where there was no way to look away. 2 days later, I invited Daniel over for dinner. I kept my voice calm on the phone, the same way I always had, and he agreed, without hesitation. Sophia will come too, he said, almost automatically, as if it was understood. Of course, I replied, just as easily. That afternoon, I moved through my kitchen with slow, familiar motions, preparing a simple meal. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that would suggest anything unusual. The kind of dinner I had made for years, back when this table had been a place of warmth instead of quiet distance. I set 3 plates. 3 glasses. The silverware aligned neatly, each piece placed with care. By the time they arrived, everything looked exactly the way it always had. Normal. When Daniel walked in, he smiled and kissed my cheek, his voice warm, his concern genuine in a way that might have comforted me once. Sophia followed behind him, her posture composed, her expression soft and attentive. If I had not known what I knew, I might have believed it. We sat down together, the 3 of us, and for a while, the conversation stayed light. Work. Weather. Small things that filled space without meaning anything. I listened more than I spoke, watching the way Daniel reached for his glass, the way Sophia adjusted her napkin, the way they moved comfortably in a reality that had not yet been challenged. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting just enough to suggest concern. "Mom, are you feeling better? The nurse said you seemed stronger last week." I placed my fork down carefully, the soft sound against the plate louder than it should have been in that moment. Then I looked at him, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something steadier. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm, "there has never been a nurse." The words settled between us, quiet but undeniable. His expression changed slowly, confusion replacing certainty as he glanced towards Sophia. She did not speak right away. She simply reached for her glass, her movements controlled, measured. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said finally, her tone smooth, but thinner than before. I did not respond to her. Instead, I reached beside me and placed a small stack of papers on the table. Bank statements, insurance records, copies of authorizations. Each page aligned neatly, each detail clear. Daniel looked down at them, his brows tightening as he scanned the first page, then the next. I watched him read, watched the shift happen not all at once, but piece by piece, as the version of reality he had been living began to fall away. No raised voices.
No sudden outburst.
Just silence, growing heavier with every second. When he finally looked up at me, there was something in his eyes I had not seen in a long time. Not certainty. Not reassurance. Something closer to realization. And in that moment, I understood that the truth had already done what it needed to do. Daniel did not speak right away. His eyes moved across the papers again, slower this time, as if he was hoping that if he read them carefully enough, the meaning might change. It did not. I could see it in the way his shoulders lowered slightly, in the way his breathing shifted, becoming heavier, more deliberate. This does not make sense," he said finally, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I have been sending money, every month. I made sure everything was covered." I nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "I know," I said gently. "That is why I needed you to see this." He turned to Sophia then, his expression searching, uncertain. "You handled this, right?" he asked, the question simple, but weighted with something deeper now. She did not answer immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on the table, on the edge of one of the papers, as if focusing on it could somehow keep everything else from unraveling. "I did what was necessary," she said at last, her voice controlled, but lacking the ease it once had. "There were complications. I had to make adjustments." Daniel frowned, confusion tightening into something sharper. "Adjustments," he repeated. "What kind of adjustments?" I watched them both without interrupting, my hands resting calmly in my lap. This was not a moment that needed my voice. The truth was already doing its work. Sophia inhaled slowly, as if choosing her words with care. "The funds were not always used directly," she said. "There were other priorities, things we had to consider. It was all temporary." Daniel stared at her, the distance between what he believed and what he was hearing becoming impossible to ignore. "You told me everything was taken care of," he said, his voice no longer calm, but not raised either. Just strained. "You told me she had help." "She did," Sophia replied quickly, but even as she said it, the words felt hollow. "I made sure she was fine." I could see the moment that sentence failed to hold. Daniel's eyes shifted back to the papers, then to me, then back to her. "She has been going through this alone," he said, each word slower than the last. "Driving herself, paying for everything. You knew that." There was no answer this time. Only silence. The kind that fills a room completely, leaving no space for anything else. I reached forward then, not abruptly, but with the same steady movement I had used all evening, and gently slid one of the documents closer to him. "Look at the dates," I said quietly. "Look at where it went."
He did.
And as he did, whatever uncertainty remained in his expression finally gave way to something clearer, something heavier. Not just realization. Responsibility. He leaned back in his chair, his hand coming up to rest briefly against his forehead, as if the weight of it all had settled there at once. Sophia remained still beside him, her composure intact on the surface, but thinner now, stretched in a way that could not last. And through it all, I stayed exactly where I was, calm, composed, no longer trying to make sense of anything because there was nothing left to figure out. Everything that needed to be seen was already in front of us. Daniel did not look at Sophia again. Not right away. He stayed there, leaning back in his chair, his eyes fixed somewhere past the table as if he was trying to place himself back into a version of reality that no longer existed. The room felt different now, heavier but not chaotic. There was no shouting, no dramatic movement, just the quiet collapse of something that had been held together by assumptions. After a long moment, he lowered his hand and looked at me instead, really looked this time, not with the distant concern he had shown before, but with something clearer, something that carried weight. "Mom," he said slowly, "why did you not tell me?" I held his gaze without hesitation. "I did not know," I replied. "And when I started to understand, I needed to be sure." He nodded once, the motion small but deliberate, as if he accepted that answer without needing anything more. Then, almost reluctantly, he turned back towards Sophia. "How long?" he asked. She remained still, her posture composed, but the silence that followed his question stretched longer than any answer could have. "It was not like that," she said finally, her voice softer now, less certain. "I was managing things. There were expenses, decisions that had to be made. I did not think it would matter in the long run." Daniel's expression tightened, not in anger, but in disbelief. "It mattered," he said quietly. "She needed that help." Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Not empty. Final. I reached forward then, gathering the papers back into a neat stack, aligning the edges with the same care I had used when I first placed them on the table. There was nothing left to present, nothing left to prove. Everything that needed to be understood had already been seen. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm, steady, "there is only one thing I need you to do." He looked at me immediately, as if holding on to the possibility that he could still fix something. "Anything," he said. I met his eyes, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet clarity that had taken time to reach. "Check your own account." The words settled into the space between us, simple and precise. For a moment he did not move. Then he reached for his phone, his hands slower than before, his confidence gone. As he scrolled, his expression changed again, not sharply, but gradually, as each detail confirmed what he had not been prepared to see. The transfers, the discrepancies, the absence of what he believed had been there. When he finally looked up, he did not speak.
He did not need to.
His silence said everything. I stood then, not abruptly, but with the same calm I had carried through the entire evening, and walked toward the kitchen, giving him the space to sit with what he had found. Behind me, the house remained quiet, but it was no longer the silence of not knowing. It was the silence that comes after. The truth has been revealed, when there is nothing left to hide and nothing left to misunderstand.